Throughout my life, I have gotten away with more reckless driving, speeding, risky driving, anything that you might do, having too much fun behind a car than anybody has any business surviving without major health or legal consequence. Between the cannonball record and just loving all these cars, and some in terrible condition and some in good condition, some I should have been in, some I shouldn't have been in, I've gotten away with all of it. And anybody who knows me very well today or rides around with me doing much will notice that I drive pretty slowly most of the time. Certainly I find wide open highways and great roads to experience what my cars are capable of, and I enjoy that very much. But what I honestly derive more pleasure out of is just using the cars like regular cars on a daily basis. And so I love racking up miles in them, taking them on long trips, and just proving that despite their terrible histories, they are still functional automobiles. And that has generally remained the case, except for perhaps one momentary lapse in good judgment that happened very recently. And today's story is about tires, and this month's sponsor for VINwiki is Bridgestone tires. They're back again for another year of support of the channel, which we greatly appreciate, but I also just love their tires. I've had their Jeweler AT Ascent tires on my Cayenne. I've put their tires on a whole bunch of stuff, and I love the products. They have an amazing selection of now OEM fitments on exotic brands like Porsche and Lamborghini, which is amazing. After so many decades of putting just Pirelli tires on cars like Lamborghinis, now you buy them and they come with Bridgestones. And so they are doing great things as a company, and I've got a link in the description below for you to check out the latest tires for your car from Bridgestone. But in the news of tires in my life, I have talked a lot about needing a new tire solution for my Bugatti Veyron. And so I bought it a little over a year ago and about 5,000 miles ago now, and it had some very old Michelin Pax tires on the OEM wheels, the Super Sport design wheels. My car, this Grand Sport, being the first car in the US that those wheels had come on. It was one of my favorite things about the car, but I didn't want to pay $40,000 for a brand new set of these tires, which would already be, having sat on the shelf for a while in O'Gara's service department, several years old. So that didn't make any real sense financially or just reasonably in terms of the way I was going to use and drive the car. And I had seen plenty of people putting aftermarket wheels on these cars, generally from HRE, but I wanted to achieve more of an OEM look, and so I decided to order a set of replica wheels for my car from a company in China. And I made some content about that, and so this story comes in just as I knew that the wheels were in hand and that the tires were on the way, because I was going to be able to just run the standard tires that come on a Chiron, which was going to be a great thing. And I had heard that that was going to be okay, potentially even blessed from on high with the people in after sales at Bugatti telling us Veyron owners that that was a safe and acceptable option for the further use of our cars. And we still believe something like that is going to happen, but it hasn't happened officially yet. But I needed tires so desperately because my old ones were so worn out, they were starting to crack, they were bald, and they were so hard that it was really a terrible ride quality for the car. It's a wonder that I had survived so many miles in it up to that point. But in fact, what had happened was after I drove it down to Miami for Moda, left it for a few items like programming keys and things like that that were sort of left over from the initial sale at Bugatti Broward, they said it was entirely too unsafe for me to drive the car home. And it's one of the very few times where I've chosen to ship that car somewhere. And so that's what we did. We'd shipped it up, and the guys at Daily Driven Exotics have been good friends of mine for years. They came right as I moved into this house and were able to film kind of the early days of the garage here, and that we went for a drive in the CL55, and a friend of mine's Ferrari Challenge Stradale that was in the garage, and had a great time, a great video for them that was quite successful. And so they have recently added Keller Moore to the fold of presenters at DDE, and so he is based in Nashville, very close to Atlanta, and he wanted to make his first real video for DDE on his own, and he asked if he could come down and shoot something with my cars. And I said, sure, you know, there's always something going on and something we could do. We went over and saw the Victoria's Secret Diablo, and of course, he wanted to see the Bugatti. And I knew that this was really going to be the last few miles that would be driven on these tires. I also knew that they had very little traction, and so I thought, well, I've seen Houston Crosta and his guys do a lot of views and a lot of donuts in Bugatti cars that were in fact rear-wheel drive converted at the time, I believe. And that worked well on the DDE channel. Let's break Keller into his indoctrination into tire slaying well. And I said, well, if we can find a good open parking lot, I'll go sling some donuts in this car. What could possibly go wrong? And again, I don't do a lot of slideshow nonsense in any of my cars. They're not really built for that, and that's not really what I'm looking looking to do anyway, but it seemed like on a quiet weekday afternoon, a reasonable idea here in town. And so we were driving around and we came across a large, wide open parking lot with no real cars in sight, and it had a ton of burnout marks on it. I said, well, this seems easy enough. Why don't you just stand here? I'll go over here and slide this thing around a little bit. And of course, for a 1,000 horsepower quadruple turbocharged car with very simple traction control that's easy to turn off, it was effortless to just slide this car around. And so in a very short amount of time, we slid it a bit, made a couple rounds, he got some good shots, and it became a very nice element to his first DDE video. And nothing goes wrong with the car, nothing really goes wrong anywhere. We just decide to leave and we drive back to my house. Now, it is a very hot day here in Atlanta, so we sweated a lot, not because of any nervousness about possible outcomes, but just because the air conditioning in my car doesn't work very well whenever it's over 90 degrees outside and you're driving the car with any level of enthusiasm. And so we got back to the house, no big deal. But the next day I was at lunch and I got a phone call from the owners of this parking lot, and they were letting me know that they had noticed what I had done. I said, well, I'm sorry, I don't know what to say. It was already a lot of marks. I don't know if you could really even say which ones were mine. They said, well, it's quite clear because there's a big difference. And, generally we were expecting to see some young, crazy kid out there in some inexpensive car, and we see you, a middle-aged man in a Bugatti. And that seemed quite strange. And so he said, would you mind coming in to talk to us about that? And I said, well, do I need a lawyer for this talk? And he said, well, no, it's not a big deal. We're not trying to get you in trouble. We just do want to talk to you about what you've done here. And I was like, okay, well, I suppose I'll be happy to. And so I get off the phone with him and I immediately call Mark Gold at the ticket clinic. And he's been here telling stories about fighting different things. And I said, Mark, is there any real trouble that I can get in for doing this? And he said, yes, Ed, of course you can get in a lot of trouble. It's like vandalism, and it can be like speed exhibition, obviously reckless driving. There's a lot of things that they could try to accomplish. And we'd say the police relative to this jurisdiction could care an awful lot. Now, we hope, of course, that what they're saying is true and that they do just want to have a conversation towards maybe some other form of resolution rather than involve proper law enforcement, but you don't have a lot of control there. So we actually said, maybe see if you can get that in writing before you show up. I thought, well, that's not really the best way to, receive their good faith effort here if I am reading into it the right way, but I did, based on his advice. I asked for that, and they, of course, were immediately happy to send me an email, say, hey, we're not trying to get you in trouble, we just want to talk. And so I said, all right, well, I will head that way, and I stopped by to see them and show up in their office, and they have these beautiful pictures printed out of different angles of me in the process of applying some very dark marks to their parking lot. In fact, as I'd shown up there and looked, it was immediately obvious which ones had been done with the gigantic wheels of my 1,000 horsepower Bugatti relative to everything else that had happened previous to my coming into that parking lot, let's say. And so I'm like, wow, it looks like you guys have some really good cameras. Any chance you want to maybe share that footage? And of course, this had all kind of come to light when they had noticed the about 4 million views overnight that the Daily Driven Exotics video had gotten. And I haven't even checked to see how many it's gotten since then, but it was a very successful piece of content for the boys. And so congrats to Keller, Dave, and the team for everything that may or may not mean to them. And so obviously they'd gotten a lot of feedback from the people that also frequent that area that this may have been me and may have been my car, and it was their parking lot. And so, all that to say they were not wildly pleased. And I was even more concerned to find out that apparently they had had a street takeover happen in their lot several months prior, and that had resulted in most of the marks that were still on there, and they just caused them to have to lock the gates at night. And it had just been a failure of their own imaginations that someone might come in the middle of the day to the empty portion of their parking lot in a Bugatti and do such a thing. And so fortunately, they were honest and they were not trying to get me into trouble, but they did want me to understand that, they had previously had to pursue more prosecutorial efforts against somebody who had done this, and they actually had to go back and scrub the marks off the parking lot manually. And I said, well, I appreciate that. I don't know that I'd very much enjoy that as an outcome to this. I said, but how about this? How about I send a pressure washer guy to do some work on it for you? I'll be happy to help you clean up your parking lot. And so I figured that was the least I could do for their willingness not to make this a bigger deal. And so I sent a guy out there, and he was able to use some special chemicals and things like that to improve the look quite a lot. But I was shocked to hear, honestly, just how much trouble you can get into for doing donuts in someone's parking lot. Because, and this is one of the things where none of us us as true car enthusiasts are like in favor of takeover culture and these people that shut down intersections and parking lots and do very dangerous things and slide their cars into each other and hang out of them and things like that. But the laws that are designed to crack down against these takeover events are very loose in how they define the events themselves. In that, just doing donuts by yourself or just driving fast next to another car, even without racing, could very easily be construed by a prosecutor as a takeover style thing, which can have some ridiculous implications legally to you and to your car. They can impound it, they can seize it in some cases, they can put you in jail, and that's good because these are extremely dangerous events. But if they're not defined in a very, very specific way, as Keller Moore has learned through his prosecution in the Nashville area for the car meetups that he had that sort of devolved, not under his control or encouragement, into takeover style activities, you can get in a ton of trouble. And I suppose I very nearly did, even though I believe at least it was as innocent as it could possibly be, in the effort to send my tires off in the best way possible and welcome Keller Moore to his new role with DDE. And so I have no idea how close I really came to a very, very bad outcome with my car or anything else, but obviously we had a lot of room and stuff to do this. We weren't there for long and we didn't hurt anything or my car, fortunately. But it, I suppose, is worth knowing for this whatever public service announcement that you got to be careful where you go and slide your car around. And once again, as we talk about tires, thank you to Bridgestone for supporting this month of content on VINwiki. Check them out now at the link in the description below to thank them for their support of the channel and find the best tires for your car from Bridgestone. And when you do, be careful about where you wear out the old ones.